so I guess we're live. So, it's about Easter, and part of my series of connecting it with my thoughts with a dissertation about the incarnation and re-envisioning all the major church holidays. So Easter, probably of all the church holidays, is the most important. And we are currently in, as far as the season of the church, in what is called Eastertide, or the season of Easter, which stretches from Easter Sunday to Pentecost Sunday, which is 50 days, or approximately 7 weeks. The first official I have to see which marker is work best here. No, I can. We'll get to that. We're going to get to that. Well, don't shut up. Just. So, it was probably observed before that, but the first official recorded observance of Easter was in the 2nd century. And it is the celebration of the resurrection of the Lord. Now, first of all, how did we come up with the term Easter? Where did that term come from? It's uncertain, but scholars have finally centered on what they believe is to be a consensus. The first thought is that it came from an Anglo-Saxon term, which is Eostra, or Eostre, which is goddess of fertility. So there was already a celebration of this goddess in the spring when people are planting, and it was fertility. And so, like Christmas, Easter, the early leaders of the Easter kind of connected Easter with the pagan recognitions going on at the time. That has been pretty much dismissed, though it was a prevailing viewpoint for some time, mainly because of the early church's railing against pagan influences. So, It is now connected to what originally started as Latin in albus, which alba means dawn. And when you translate that to High German, it becomes Eostrum, or Easter. What the French do is they don't bother with all that question, and they just go with Pâques, which is connected to Pascha, which means Passover. So, what that brings in is that with all these meanings, there is a strong connection between Easter, the Christian celebration of Easter, and the Jewish celebration of Passover. And those two dates, those two celebrations, have always been connected in the sense that, and this is where we get into your question, Donna, that we determine Easter in much the same way that the Jewish communities determine Passover. In other words, we follow, instead of a solar calendar for Easter, we follow a lunar calendar. And the lunar calendar, since we follow the Julian calendar through most of the year, which is a solar calendar, after the Roman Julius, Caesar Julius, and the lunar calendar goes off the moon, they don't sync up together. So that's the reason why Easter jumps around. It's because we're trying to translate from one calendar to another. So, what's the formula in determining the date? And there was a lot of controversy about that because, of course, in the history of the church, you can't have any decision made without controversy. Such has always been, and such it probably always will be. So, there were what was called the Paschal controversies. In Asia Minor, or the eastern part of the empire, they observed the Easter on the same weekend as, actually the same day as Passover, which is determined by the 14th day of the first moon, or 14 Nisan. So that's when the crucifixion happened, right? Because Jesus had Passover meal beginning in the evening, and the evening starts the new day in the Jewish days. And so through the next day is the crucifixion. So he celebrates the meal in the evening and is crucified later that day, which is actually according to the sun seems to be the next day, but it's liturgically the same day. Does that make sense? Okay. So 2 days later, or 16 Nisan, would be Easter. Yeah. So it's 2 weeks after the first full moon of the year. Okay. So the first point of view says that 16 days after the first moon, no matter what day it fell on, was to be Easter. That was the first point of view. So in this first point of view, it may not necessarily be a Sunday. But then they said, but then people said, well, that can't be. It has to be on a Sunday because the Bible says it's the first day of the week. So it became the second point of view said it has to be on Sunday. And that was in the Western point of view. So it was always the first Sunday after the 14th day after the first moon. Okay. So you have your first moon of the year, 14 days, and then whenever Sunday happens after that is Easter. More and more churches started adopting that. And then, of course, Constantine decided, okay, this is a controversy, we have to settle it. Council of Nicaea. And it says, first Sunday following first moon after equinox. And that's what stuck. Except for because Council of Nicaea led to the schism of the church. The Eastern Orthodox they follow the Julian calendar instead of the Gregorian calendar. So they follow a solar calendar rather than so they always have Easter later. And another part of that is that it is part of their belief system that Easter cannot fall on the same weekend as Passover. Why? I don't know. I don't know that much about the Eastern Orthodox Church, but that's part of their understanding. So it prohibits Easter from being celebrated before or at the same time as Passover. Prohibited. Now, what is interesting is in the 20th century, there has been a concerted effort of a lot of churches of coming up with a fixed date. For Easter. That will be the same date every year. It won't move around. And that is the one that they've come closest to following is the second Sunday of April being the fixed date. Came close to that, had some churches agree, but still haven't come to full agreement yet. And there hasn't been any recent attempts. But there is an interest in saying, you know, instead of us trying to figure out every year where Easter's going to fall, let's just come up with one date that's good. And the other argument says, oh, come on, it's not that hard. You just go spring equinox, come up with the first moon, and the Sunday after that, there you go. Put it on your calendar, and you're good. I just follow my UCC desk calendar to know where Easter is. But that's the reason why it moves around. Does that make sense, Donna? The reason why it follows that, why they've adopted it that way, first of all, is because of the Jewish connection. Because the Jewish faith has always followed the lunar calendar. But the other major reason why, and probably why the Jewish followed the lunar calendar too, is that of the strong connection of the lunar calendar to planting and harvest. There's always been a belief that you plant at certain times, and that's connected to the movement of, or the orbit of the moon. That the moon has, since it has more control over the tides of the ocean, there's always been a belief that it has more of a tie to the Earth's rhythms than the sun does. So that's probably more than any other reason why the lunar calendar has been followed, has never left us. And it's probably the reason why there's such a strong connection, especially in the Jewish theological lexicon or history that has bled into Christian, and why there's been such a strong connection between pagan holidays and Christian holidays. Throughout the history of humankind, human beings have always believed that there is divine connection with fertility, especially of the earth. And you find that in all the major religions. All the major religions have some sort of connection about how God, and where you have religions where there's more than one God, there's always a God, goddess, usually a goddess of fertility that makes the sun rise, that causes the crops to grow, that you pray to when you can't have a child, that there's always a divine connection that provides us, allows us, or enables us, not only the earth, but humankind to be fertile and fruitful. So that's kind of the history of Easter, as far as what the meaning of the word is, and how it's determined when it falls. What are the traditions around Easter? Well, early on, there's a number of traditions that were considered vital for Easter observances. One is baptism. In that, in the early church, new converts to the faith were only baptized into the church one day of the year, and that was on Easter morning. Because it is a day of celebration and of new life. So as they're having their life transformed, as they're given new life in Christ, through the resurrection of Christ, their sins are forgiven, they're given new life. The Easter, which celebrates the resurrection or life out of death, becomes the holiday where that, or the Sunday, the time of the year when that happens. As the church has progressed through history, we haven't limited baptism, certainly, nor bringing into membership to Easter. There are some churches that still today, and there's a part of me that can understand it, that will confirm their confirmands on Easter for the same reason as the ancient church did it, as far as bringing new people in. For me, not only does it work as far as timing, as far as teaching goes, but there's a theological reason why I have confirmation on Pentecost Sunday, because I believe since that's the birth of the church, it makes sense for confirmands who are becoming members of the church are confirmed on Pentecost Sunday, which is the birth of the church. That's my rationalization anyway. But it has the theological basis. So that's one of the traditions of Easter. Another is that of the Easter Vigil. And the Easter Vigil is, the purpose of the Easter Vigil is to signify the time of from Holy Saturday to Easter. Or it's the time of waiting between the time that Jesus died to his resurrection. It's considered to be lost time, where the world is dark. Certainly in the lives of the disciple, the time for them is dark. They're in grief. They're in mourning. They're in fear. Their lives are dark. So the connection, the tradition in ancient time was that new converts into the church, after they finished their catechism or their training to become new members, on Holy Saturday are brought into the church and locked in the church in darkness. And they're supposed to spend the whole night in prayer, alone. And then on Easter morning, the doors of the church are flung wide open, and people come in celebrating, redress all the new converts in white, and they're baptized into the church. That's the tradition of the Easter Vigil. The only church in modern times that still observes an Easter Vigil is the Roman Catholic Church. And even then, they don't do it all night, though most Catholic churches will have Mass at 10 p.m. so that it ends at midnight. Protestants' tradition is a sunrise service. This is the first church that I've been at that doesn't do a sunrise service. Haven't had them for a while. Yeah. My liturgy professor, Horace Allen, was a bit of a wag. He would joke. And when he was explaining the Easter Vigil, he says, Catholics still do it. He says, Protestants got lazy. They just decided to wake up at sunrise and pretend that they've been up all night. But then but that was a joke, because what he knew and what it is that there's a theological backing, understanding behind the sunrise service, and that is to symbolize the women going to the tomb. That's why the sunrise service developed as a tradition, is to honor that part of the Easter story. So those are the liturgical traditions that have been evolved around, one more, and that is the lighting, and this goes back to the very early, is the lighting of the Paschal candle, which we do in our church. That candle has been provided to our church by Joan Basanko. So it's very important to her that it gets lit every Easter, and is lit. And it's lit throughout the season of Easter. And the purpose, the meaning of the Paschal candle, is that it is to symbolize light coming out of darkness and overpowering darkness. That is the purpose of the meaning, the symbolism of the Paschal candle. So those are the liturgical traditions of the church. Now, just like Christmas, Easter also developed some customs that have little connection to the religious meaning of the holiday. What are those? Anybody know? For Easter? Eggs. What's the other one? Easter bunny. Now, the practice of decorating eggs does have a religious backing in this sense. In the early church, the church prohibited the eating of eggs during Holy Week. Don't know why, but they did. Well, did the hens stop laying during Holy Week? No. They continued to lay eggs. So those eggs that were laid during Holy Week were called holy eggs. And they were meant to be colored in colors that symbolize Christ. In the Eastern Orthodox churches, especially in the Russian Orthodox churches, the eggs were only to be decorated in red to symbolize the blood of Christ. Others believed that they only should be decorated in purple to celebrate the royalty or the victory of Christ. Or green to honor, to celebrate the new life you find in Christ. So the eggs, the decorating of the eggs, have an origin, a religious origin. The Easter bunny, however, comes from folklore. There's an Easter hare that every Easter appears and has a unique ability to lay eggs. But not only that, it's a very generous hare in that it delivers toys to all the needful children of the area. It's a folklore. It's a legend, it's a myth, it's a fairy tale. But it's stuck, and it got connected with Easter. And so, we have the Easter bunny that runs around with a basket full of eggs. Mm-hmm. Could be. You know, like the Fabergé eggs? Could be. Eggs have always been a religious symbol in that they symbolize new life coming out of a broken shell. That in order for the chick to be born, the shell has to be broken. So in a sense, the egg has to die in order for the chick to live. So there's new life coming out of which because I'm so good at transitions, leads me into the incarnational interpretation of all this. It is hard, the connection with the incarnation is more difficult with Easter than it is with Christmas, obviously. Except for life is connected with death. And death is connected with life. Life, in many ways, loses its meaning without the fear of death. If we live forever, physically live forever, we have no fear of death, then one could say that our lives, much of our life loses its meaning. It seems to be somehow less precious, less valuable if we live forever. But the Easter story says that death is no longer a threat. So, what we see is a union between the divine and the mortal, or the human. And that there is a gap. What bridges that gap? Christ. Bridges that gap between the divine and the human. So, in the incarnation story, we see the divine becoming human. What we see in the Easter story is the human becoming divine. We see the circle being completed. God enters into our lives through incarnation, and we return back to God through resurrection. That becomes the power of the connection. Now, what is the vehicle by which this happens? Through Christ. Spirit. Somebody grab a Bible out of the pews. Turn to Romans 8, verses 1 through 12. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts, Roman. It's right after Acts of the Apostles. Chapter 8, verses 1 through 12. Yes, please. Okay. So, what Paul is saying is that there's flesh, and there's spirit. Flesh experiences death. Spirit brings life. One of the last statements, one of the statements attributed to Jesus on the cross is, "Into your hands I commend my spirit." So, we are given the Spirit. The Spirit becomes the vehicle by which we have victory over death. We still experience death physically. We can't escape that. We're human beings. But because God's Spirit has entered us, we are not limited by our mortal bodies and by death. And that we have within us that which is eternal. That is part of the message, a part of the gospel of incarnational theology, is that through Christ, we have within us a part of the divine, through the Spirit, the eternal Spirit, which exists in us. Where does free will go is that we can deny that Spirit and rely only on our flesh. But then, we cannot have victory over death. Does all that make sense? Or did I go over your heads? Now the question is, for me, whether I'll pass muster with my advisor. That's all I got. Any questions? Comments? Guess we'll see you Wednesday for the next study on Genesis, where we start getting into